Hi, everybody. My name is Gennady Morochnik, and I'm going to start this out. Tonight really is a reflection on the exodus of the Jewish people from the Soviet Union. It's very similar to the story we read in the Torah, in the book of Exodus. You know, an empire with a stone-hearted Pharaoh, you know, the guy who forgot the good things that Jewish people have done for his country, and eventually turned negative and enslaved the Jewish people. And similarly to the ancient Israelites, thank God we saw the Iron Curtain part, and we got out. As a Soviet immigrant, it was incredibly touching and incredibly warm feeling to learn that the Jewish people right here in the Rochester area have actually done so much to help the Russian Jews. It was very touching to learn that the people right in our community spoke up in support. They volunteered, they donated their time, resources. They made real efforts in helping the Russian Jews. It's comforting to know that. It's comforting to know that our local Jewish leaders right in our community were part of this. They were part of this and were inspired and were even positively affected by this little piece of history. You know, positive ripples from this are still felt today, right in our community. And I'm sure we're going to hear some of this from the stories, the speakers that will be coming up. You know, I'd like to take a moment right off the bat and thank our speakers, our local leaders. These are just a few, just four of very many examples of local people right in our community that were a part of this, who have very inspiring stories. And I'd like to thank Meredith Dragon. She's the CEO of the Rochester Jewish Federation. Rabbi Nehemiah Vogel, who's the director of Chabad Lubavitch of Rochester. Alex Episochny, the CEO of Clario Vision. And Rabbi David Loganov, who is the educational director of Light of Israel. And their stories are amazing, and I think you're going to have a fantastic time. You know, and one thing is we should keep this positive, and one thing I thought about starting this out is to highlight the unity and the similarities of things. The Russian and the Jewish cultures may have had their differences, you know, but as the teacher and a great rabbi, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Lubavitcher Rabbi, taught, we can always find positivity. We can always find goodness in all of our experiences and all of the things that we've gone through. And what great way to join the Russian and the Jewish culture as to start, like all important events and occasions start out with a l'chaim. So I'd like to begin this event with a toast. Just take a moment to. And if you have a cup or a beverage handy, I see Alex is already ready. You know, I want to say l'chaim. I want to say that now that we're all here in America and so many years later, we should all recognize our freedoms, and not just recognize, but also utilize our freedoms for becoming our true selves, our real versions of ourselves. And I want to wish wellness and goodness and only happiness to all of you. So I'll begin this with a toast, and then we'll launch our event. So, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen.
Amen.
Amen. L'chaim.
L'chaim, l'chaim. And I'll turn this over to our program. We'll start out with a video.
Being Jewish was a stigma in Russia, in Soviet Russia. The main way that you knew you were Jewish is you just
This just worked a moment ago, but we're gonna get this going. Thank you for your patience. Maybe it's time for another
Gennady,
one.
was the video not working?
The sound turned on, but we didn't see a video.
You know what? Let me try. Sorry, I saw it on my screen. Hold on. Let me relaunch it. It was fine on my end.
Okay.
Hang on. You know, we've tried it 3 times, and of course, it worked every time when we tested it.
Yeah.
being Jewish was a stigma in Russia, in Soviet Russia. The main way that you knew you were Jewish is you had a Jewish last name and you tried to hide that as much as possible.
We were trying to get out in 1980. I lost my job and then my mom lost her job. But I guess the hope was still there.
To say that we were Jews even to our friends in school, it was kind of embarrassing. It's still a trauma, I think, to me. It's still very traumatic.
Here was World War II, millions of Jews died in Europe, and here were these Jews who were being persecuted for their religion.
I think that's how the movement began, was because you could see the faces and you could identify with people.
President Reagan felt this was an important issue, and there was certainly a sense among the leadership of the American Jewish community, inspired by Natan Sharansky, going from community to community and saying we have to have a major rally. In December of 1987, the leader of the Soviet Union is in Washington and going to be meeting with the President of the United States. So there was this sense that, well, maybe we are affecting history. The organizers worried about, what if we get a small turnout? It would be worse than if we hadn't had a rally at all.
All of a sudden, you just saw people coming down the streets, a sea of people with banners and signs for a cause that was so deeply Jewish and so deeply human.
Religious freedom did not emerge just yesterday. Each generation must wage that struggle anew.
If we are beyachad, if we are together, we won't let the light go out. Don't let the light go out.
People like David Harris, Mark Levin, Malcolm Homeline, so many people worked to make this happen. We have people in our own synagogue who were part of that. They were the American Jews that were, going to these rallies and supporting people like my parents and my family.
Our community was poor. We came with nothing.
Study and take my boards and had a baby.
And I was so proud of my parents because they'd just gotten a job and they were making $4.25 an hour.
What I remember distinctly is our first Thanksgiving. I opened up the door and there was a guy with a box, okay? And he said, "It's for you." I started crying. I never realized that somebody can just give you stuff for free just to make your holiday to happen.
Every little step that was taken had tremendous consequences.
We came for Vicky, hoping that she's going to get a better life. But we got much better life than we expected.
If you can unite people and look at things in a human way, like we did with Soviet Jews, anything is possible.
I always look around and I see people are doctors and lawyers and doing well for themselves. Sergey Brin, we have inventors of Google.
It's like one of our people, like we call them наши, like ours. Один из наших, one of ours made it to like the very top of the world, basically.
Not only these people made good for themselves, yes, we live the American dream, but also it's very important not to just realize the success and have a pride in it, but it's also very important to be able to share it with others.
The Soviet Jewry story is a symbol and represents a time that American Jews were able to come together and set our brothers free.
It's very emotional, feeling for me. I think that a lot of my friends, a lot of my relatives, effectively were allowed to be here just because of this march. And it's a feeling of gratitude, it's a feeling of pride because of American Jewish community who came together and demand as a one voice allow our brothers and sisters from Soviet Union to join them. I think if we could find capacity and passion, Jews as a nation, as a community, could really fight together, shoulder to shoulder, and unite as a people.
Wow, very moving, very moving. Thank you for sharing that. I'd like to turn the mic over to Meredith Dragon.
Thank you, Gennady, and thank you for everyone being here this evening for this really interesting and really inspiring opportunity to be together. So I'm going to share a story very briefly, and the truth is, this really isn't my story. This story has certainly shaped who I am, but this is really the story of my family, my dad, and our whole family, the impact of Soviet Jewry. And I just want to acknowledge actually that my parents are on the Zoom tonight, which is very sweet. The top of my dad's head, you see there's somebody named Selma Schurter, and you can see my dad's little bald head from the top. So, I was a very little girl in the mid 1970s, and my dad was asked by my uncle, who was at the time a very prominent Reform rabbi in New York City. And he was asked on behalf of the Israeli government to go on a mission to the Soviet Union to help bring information to the former Soviet Union about the refuseniks and to bring information home. And the main part of their trip was really to find out the status of Natan Sharansky. At that point in time, Israel didn't know if Natan was alive or dead, or where he was and what was going on. So my uncle, who's not here, but my dad and his little bald head that you see, are, sort of like the two most unlikely spies that you could really ever come across, which is part of the reason they were so perfect for this mission, because they were really so unassuming. My uncle spoke Hebrew. My dad has his PhD in Russian history. He's a Russian history professor and speaks some Russian. So between the two of them, they figured they could kind of get by between Hebrew and Russian and figure it out as they go. They spent about 6 months training with the Mossad in New York City. And after their training was over, the Israeli government said to them, good luck, have a great trip, we don't know you, but bring us back information, we hope it all goes okay. So as I said, I was a little girl. My aunt and my mom each had 3 kids at home. And when I think about it now, if my husband were to say, I'm going to the Soviet Union or a country like that for 3 weeks on a mission to find out the status of the Jewish population, I'm not so sure that I would have been as supportive as my mom and my aunt, but they were as much a part of this process as my dad and my uncle. As a matter of fact, my mom sews beautifully, and part of her job was to sew as much Jewish paraphernalia into the inside of a London Fog raincoat so that my dad could bring things like sidurs and history books and all kinds of Jewish material to sneak to people so they could continue to live their Jewish lives at a time when obviously being Jewish in the Soviet Union was illegal. So I remember very vaguely my dad putting on this London fog raincoat and looking about twice the size that he was supposed to be. And I didn't really quite understand it at the time. And I probably didn't understand it until a good 10 years after, when, you know, as I heard my dad repeat these stories over and over again, I understood what this was about. So off they went on Aeroflot to the Soviet Union on an organized trip, with a list of names of people with whom they were supposed to meet, in order to bring all of the information and to find out the status of Natan Sharansky. There was very little communication for those 3 weeks. I don't remember much of the time that they were away, but I do remember going to JFK Airport, and I remember standing with my mom and my aunt and my brother and my sister and my cousins, and being very anxious to see if they were going to come off the plane, because there was certainly a chance that in doing what they were doing, which was illegal, doing something on behalf of the Israeli government, which was illegal, that they were putting themselves and their families in jeopardy. And I'll never forget the look on my dad's face when he came out of the hangar, and there he was, and he looked so exhausted, and my uncle looked so exhausted. They were both very sick. They had gotten sick from the food, but they looked so happy to be home and to be with their families. And then the tours and the talks began, and I went with my dad all over Long Island, where we lived, in New York, as he went to share the story of what he saw of Soviet Jewry with people, to really get those who were interested, and to galvanize the Jewish community and people's hearts and minds around the notion that we needed to free Soviet Jewry. And for me as a child, it really helped shape an understanding of what it meant to be part of Jewish community, that it meant living beyond the borders in the town in which you lived, and having an ultimate responsibility, collective responsibility, to the people, our people, regardless of where they live, whether you're in the Soviet Union or South America or South Africa or Israel. And it helped shape my understanding that there are things that are in life that are so important, that they're more important than the day-to-day, and that we as Jews should recognize that importance and live our lives in a way that we really do enable people to live freely and to live Jewishly anywhere in the world. So in part, it's what shaped who I am and why I got into Jewish communal service. So while I was not a part of the trip, and I was very little, it had such a deep impact on me that, frankly, part of the reason why I work in the Federation system is because of the impact that my dad's journey had at the time, and the very, very, very deep impression it left on me, because of the selflessness of my dad and of my uncle to do what they did at such a difficult and dangerous time. And it's really a part of my ultimate joy and pride when I look at how the Soviet Jewry galvanized the Federation movement, the many, 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 many millions and millions and millions of dollars that was raised across the United States by the Federation system to ensure that we freed Soviet Jews, and not only freed them, but had the opportunity to resettle them both in Israel and all across the United States. And just a piece about the resettlement in Rochester, which I know the others will speak about more significantly. When Russian Jews were resettled in the United States, Jewish communities were assigned a fair share of people that they were supposed to settle, so that we didn't end up with communities where there were subcultures of only Russians. So communities were given a fair share and given resources to help with resettlement. And Rochester, being the kind of community that it is, and as devoted to the Jewish community as it is, we took far more than our fair share in Rochester. And it was funded by our federation, and it's still today such a source of pride that we played such a distinctive part in the resettlement. And I'm so proud of people like Gitana, who now work for Federation, who wouldn't have been here without the movement and wouldn't do what she does, and Gennady, who organized the call today, and Svetlana in our office, who is in our finance department, and Diana, who runs our teen programs. I mean, to think back to 1977 and being a little girl and watching my dad, and today being able to work for the system that helped make that happen is such an honor and a privilege for me. And it's why I continue to do what I do. So thank you. At this time, I'd like to introduce Rabbi Vogel, who will share his story from Rochester of the last 40 years of resettlement here right in Rochester. Thanks, Rabbi Vogel.
Thank you, Meredith. So my wife and I and our 1.5-year-old Dvorah Leah arrived in Rochester exactly 40 years ago. It was the summer of 1981, and we came here to start Chabad here in Rochester. And our mandate was to strengthen Jewish life as much as possible, to find whatever we could do to help the Jewish community. But from day one, we had a special place in our hearts to work with the newly arrived Russian Jewish community. It was, from day one, it was very much a focus of Chabad outreach here in Rochester. And let me tell you why. Actually, a few reasons. Number one, Chabad Lubavitch as a movement has its roots in Russia, going back to the first Rebbe of Chabad, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, who was imprisoned by the Tsarist authorities, all the way to the sixth Rebbe of Chabad, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchok, who was imprisoned by the communists in 1927 because he was leading the effort to maintain Jewish life in Russia. So there is the movement connection, and then there is my personal connection. First of all, my mother-in-law herself was from Russia. She lived in Antwerp, and in Antwerp, she put together an organization that collected money and then sent packages of clothing to Jewish families left behind in the Soviet Union. She always felt a special responsibility to help her brothers and sisters left behind in the Soviet Union. They would send packages of jeans, umbrellas, whatever you could sell in the black market in the Soviet Union. And families lived for months on the proceeds of these packages. So from my mother-in-law, I constantly heard about Russische Yidden, about how you got to help Russian Jews. And then for me personally, in the spring of 1981, just a few weeks before coming to Rochester, I had the great privilege of myself being sent on a teaching mission to the Soviet Union. It was specifically to Moscow. 8 days, I went with my brother-in-law to Moscow, and our mission was to meet with the Hasidim of Moscow. And believe it or not, there was an active group of Hasidim. There were older Hasidim, remnants from the old Hasidic families. But more incredibly, there was a group of young Hasidim. These were young Russian Jews who had not come from any kind of Hasidic background, but they were thirsting for Yiddishkeit. They were thirsting for Torah and mitzvahs. And so our job was to spend 8 days with these people and teach and inspire. And so I have to tell you, it was 8 unforgettable days and nights of teaching Torah, songs, nigunim, farbrengens, lots of l'chaim with vodka and herring, visiting families, one-on-one discussions. And we met with real Jewish heroes, Gertje Wilensky and Rosenstein, Shachnovsky, Kamishov, Ilya Esas. And the truth is, I have to tell you that, we came to teach, but these people taught us a lot more than we could possibly teach them. Yes, we taught them Torah, and we taught them Nigunim, and we taught them a lot of things. But what these Russian Jews taught us in Moscow, they taught us what it means to be Jewish and to have the heroism and the sacrifice to maintain Jewish life. Remember, this was 1981. This was the days of Brezhnev, and it was not easy to be a practicing Jew. And so just a few weeks later, we come to Rochester, and I'm still very much under the impact of what I saw with my own eyes in Moscow. And that's why when we came to Rochester, we were all fired up with this sense of realizing that we have to do special outreach to the Russian Jewish community that's here. Because after seeing firsthand the courage, the determination of Jews in Russia to stay Jewish, so we wanted to make sure that Russian Jews, once they come here, would also be able to stay Jewish as well. And that coming to America would not only be of material benefit, but it would also mean spiritual benefit as well. And as you know, the irony of being Jewish in the Soviet Union was that the authorities would not let you forget that you were Jewish. It was right there in your documents that you're Jewish. So you could not assimilate. It was difficult to assimilate. On the other hand, coming to America with all the freedom of America, that freedom could possibly allow for assimilation. So the question would be, is America a mixed blessing for Russian Jews? And we knew then we had to reach out, teach and motivate and make sure that it's an absolute 100% blessing for Russian Jews to be here in America. So where did we begin? Well, in 1981, I have to tell you, it was pretty simple to find the Russian Jewish community because pretty much everyone Russian lived in one place, and that place was Bobridge Drive. In fact, I always wondered who came up with the name Bobridge. It sounds Russian, it sounds like a shtetl. And in fact, back then, Bobridge Drive really was a shtetl. And every Sunday, I remember that first summer in 1981, every Sunday, my wife and I, we'd put Dvorele in a stroller. My wife was actually quite pregnant with our Levi, who would be born a couple of months later. And we would go every Sunday afternoon to Bobridge Drive. The weather was nice. And we would just walk around because everybody was out. The apartments were small and therefore everybody was outside. And we just walk around and schmooze in English and Yiddish and get to know people. And I was young enough to be able to play soccer with a younger crowd. And we became very, very good friends. In fact, later on, I had the privilege of officiating at some of the weddings. We visited apartments. We went from door to door. And we talked with the families about Jewish identity. We talked to them about sending their children to Hillel School. Back then, Hillel School had a very special scholarship offer for Russian Jewish families. And so we were encouraging children should be sent to Hillel School. We also later on made our own Sunday school for those who didn't want to go to day school. And we also encouraged them to come to our day camp. We talked about mezuzah. And one very important thing that we talked about was about making a bris, brizanya. That's one of the few Russian words that I learned. To make a bris for the boys back in the Soviet Union, it was obviously something that was hardly ever done. And thank God we were able to arrange a good number of brises for the families. And I have to tell you that these were proud Jews. These were Jews who had suffered so much because of their Jewishness, but obviously at the same time were quite ignorant of their Jewish heritage. And therefore there was just so much for us to do, to teach and to reach out. And so what else did we do? Every holiday we tried to do something special for the Russian Jews. On Pesach, we made big seders. For the first few years, I would run of the first night of Pesach, a big seder in the Blossom Nursing Home, which is just around the corner from Bobridge Drive. It was owned actually by a Jewish doctor, Dr. Sobi, and he allowed us to use the dining hall after they'd finished with their meal, and it was packed. And I ran the seder in Yiddish, English. You know, I somehow managed. I mean, the truth is, I should have learned Russian by now, but I'm not that good at not that good at languages. Eventually, a good chunk of the Russian Jewish community moved from Bobridge Drive and actually moved to Penfield, to Crown Oak and Penfield. Now, I would have to walk back after the first Seder to get home. And once they moved to Penfield, I remember that first year, I said to myself, there's no way I can do this. It's a 10-mile walk. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to do a Seder in Penfield. But then about maybe, I think it was 2 weeks before Pesach, I got news that the Christian missionaries had reached out to the Russian Jewish community and told them that they were making a Seder for them. I don't know how many are aware of this, but back then, there was actually a concerted effort on the part of missionaries to take advantage of the vulnerability of the Russian Jews. So when we heard that they are making a Seder, we said, no way, we're not going to allow that to happen. And we announced that we're making a Seder in Penfield. Thank God we were able to pull it off, and thank God I made it home that night. But eventually the Seders moved to Bethel. For a number of years, we did the Russian Seders in Bethel. We would try to get Russian-speaking yeshiva boys to come and lead the Seder in Russian, but if we couldn't, then somehow or other we managed with, again, like I said, with our Yiddish and English. Eventually, the Russian Seder moved to Chabad in Brighton. Also wanted to mention that the JCC on Tuesday mornings had a special program for the Russian immigrants. And I was actually part of that. And so I taught a weekly class, a weekly Torah class to the older Russian Jews and did that in Yiddish. And then Hanukkah. Hanukkah was always the big party. Initially, we would do it in the basement of Beth HaKnesses. And from the very first Hanukkah party, Sasha Podolsky, may he live and be well, with his accordion, was there with his music. and we would try to bring, again, a Russian speaker. And in fact, after I finish speaking, I'm going to show you some old photos from those early Russian Hanukkah parties that I was able to dig up. We would also bring our Sukkah mobile to Barbridge Drive. We would arrange the sounding of the shofar on Barbridge Drive for Rosh Hashanah. And also to this day, we have the Russian newspaper Shalom. Also want to say that throughout all the years, we tried to make a special effort to reach not just the older Russian Jews, but also the younger ones. And it was Aaron Efraimov who was actually very helpful. He got together a whole group of teenagers, and we had a weekly discussion group on Sundays. And this actually lasted for years. And we would discuss all kinds of topics of Jewish interest. And to this day, we're still connected, and we're still friends. So this is just some of the things that we did back then. And so here we are now, 40 years later. And some things change and some things don't change. What has obviously changed is that the Russian Jews have come a long way and have been thank God, very, very successful here in Rochester and in America in general. What has not changed is the ongoing question, which is, now that we have religious freedom, what's next? How do we maximize the freedom to live openly as Jews in America? How do we maximize that freedom? And what has not changed is the open invitation to learn more, experience more, and grow Jewishly, and continue to take full advantage of the blessing of religious freedom in America. I just want to mention that this week's Torah portion, it speaks about the journeys of the Jewish people when we left Egypt. And the Torah uses the word journeys in the plural. And the question is, it was just one journey out of Egypt. Why use the plural? And so the answer that is given is yes, geographically, it took one journey to leave Egypt. But spiritually, it was a journey with many, many parts to it. Because spiritually, to leave Egypt and to leave the spiritual slavery of Egypt, that journey was ongoing. And that's why the Torah uses the word journey in the plural, journeys. And I want to say that this is true of the journey of the Russian Jews. That yes, leaving the Soviet Union, I know it was first to Italy and then here, then there. It wasn't necessarily one journey, but ultimately you've arrived. The Russian Jewish community has arrived. But the spiritual journey of leaving behind the communist effort to destroy Jewish life and leaving that behind and graduating out of that mindset, out of that culture, and to grow Jewishly, that is a journey that is ongoing. And so I hope that we can all continue this journey together, and l'chaim. And I want to take a couple of minutes now and show you some old pictures. I'm going to go pretty fast. Okay, so here are the pictures. And these are the pictures of the Russian party during Hanukkah. I don't know if you're going to recognize any people, but there's Sasha on the right playing accordion. You can see it was a big crowd, and everyone's having a great time. A lot of older people, and everyone's smiling. Everyone's just so happy to be there. And there was dancing and there was singing. It was freilich. It was just a wonderful thing. As you can see, everyone's just having a fabulous time. And then, of course, there was special emphasis on the children. They were given dreidels. They got to light the menorah. They got prizes. I wonder if there's anyone in the audience who recognizes himself or herself as a youngster. But there we are, having a grand time. Now here I want to talk about this for a second. There were some years that before we had the Russian party, we actually had a big menorah lighting at 12 corners specifically for the Russian Jews. So they came by bus from Barbridge, from Penfield, from wherever they were. And they first came to 12 corners for a public menorah lighting right in the street. And I want to tell you how this was just such an awesome, beautiful event for Russian Jews who had lived in the Soviet Union where Jewishness had to be so hidden. And now to see how right in the street, in just right at 12 Corners, in the middle of town, you can come together, light a big menorah, and celebrate your Jewishness. And we had a great time. We sang and danced, and it was just fabulous. Here, the Russian party at this point got so big it moved to Beth Shalom. It's quite a big crowd back then. We're talking about probably 150 people coming. And here are some of the younger Russian boys that we got to know who helped us. Actually, they became our helpers. Here they're helping us pack Purim packages. And here's a picture of a family. This is in Rochester General. This is just before the bris. See the little boy there, his mother's holding on to him tight. This little boy is going to be having his bris. On my right is Dr. Ron Rabinowitz. He was the urologist that always donated his time and everything. And all the way next to me is the father of the child. And all the way to the left was Rabbi Solomon Cohen of blessed memory. He was the moil in Rochester for many, many years. And so when we did the bris, he was actually the moil, obviously under the supervision of Dr. Rabinowitz, but this was done always in the hospital. Here is the Sukkah-mobile. Anyway, so this is just some of the pictures that I wanted to share with you. And again, it's been 40 wonderful years, and let's hope that we all continue the journey together. It's at this point that it's my pleasure to introduce Alex Zapisochny, part of a young family that left the hardships of the Soviet Union and came to Rochester. Alex has embraced the opportunities this country has to offer, has become a local business leader, and now is able to give back to the community that originally helped him and his family. I think this is just a beautiful way of how things are coming full circle. So now, my friends, Alex Zapisochny.
Thank you, Rabbi Vogel. And it was wonderful to see those photos. Definitely recognized a number of faces that and a number of just wonderful images. So yes, my name is Alex Zapisochny. I was born in 1971 in what was then Leningrad. And then 7 years later, we began our immigration from there to the United States. And as I thought about this big topic, I tried to think about what are the maybe elements of it that would be particularly noteworthy or interesting to others. And I really kind of came to three that I'd like to share. One is maybe the very common question of why is it that we immigrated to the United States in the first place? And the story is somewhat complex, but I will say that it probably was sort of less necessarily the active desire to practice as Jews. In some ways, the idea of practicing as a Jew was something that kind of was almost too much to imagine. All of us spend time thinking about how to, as was actually mentioned in the video, hide the fact that we were Jewish. Even though I left as a 7-year-old, I certainly knew long before I was 7 that talking about being Jewish or having Jewish relatives, all those things was something that you just should not say kind of out and about outside of your apartment. And I would also say that it wasn't so much for any sort of hope for material gain or necessarily a better material life. Now, certainly my parents and other families who came here knew that there was a reasonable chance that when they went to a different country that wasn't the USSR, that they were going to do better. But again, that also was not really the main driving force, because if you think about what it is that people like my parents and many of their friends did at that time, it really was at that time leaving everybody you knew, giving up your citizenship, basically, except for those that you thought might follow you, you were never going to presumably see any of those people again. There was even some danger in keeping in any sort of touch with them in any sort of real way. And so maybe you could write a letter, but you couldn't say too much in it. I mean, people truly were leaving behind all the people that they cared about. And they weren't doing it, and we weren't doing it for, slightly better lives or anything like that. We were really doing it for the broader idea of being able to live kind of as who we are. I actually spoke to my parents again recently in preparation for tonight's discussion, and a lot of what they said really rings in a very similar way to what I've heard from others who also came during that 1970s time frame. one of the things that really stood out to my parents, and that's really difficult to deal with, is this idea that you could not, in the Soviet Union, say who you are, say what you think, say what you feel, and that there were large portions of the day where you had to essentially play along as though you were a supporter of everything that the communist government wanted you to think. There was a lot of play acting. There was a lot of fitting kind of the expectations of those around you, and specifically those in government. And little by little, when you live that way, it becomes very hard to feel that you are truly able to be yourself. And that's really what motivated both of my parents and so many of the people that I know that left in the 1970s. It's just this idea that, yes, they wanted a better life for themselves and especially for their children. But when they thought about that, it was really the freedom, the ability to express yourself as you wish, practice religion as you wish, be a Jew and be open about that, but also just have all the other freedoms that are so common to this country that unfortunately, of course, people back then could hardly expect. Now, in the case of my father, his side of the family, he also had another concern. Each of my grandparents actually was in a place called Vorkuta, which some people on this call may recognize as essentially a Siberian labor camp. Each of my grandparents separately had been sent there during the Stalin days. My grandmother, because she had been foreign-born, and all foreign-born people were essentially suspicious to the Stalin government, she spent about 9 years doing hard labor before being released. My grandfather had said something that somebody claimed wasn't pro-Stalin enough during university, and so he was put into that labor camp as well for about 7 years. But even after each of them served their sentences, they actually only could move really on the other side of the labor camp fence. And they were there, I mean, essentially they were initially imprisoned both in the 1930s, and they were there until 1968, basically living on the other side of that fence. That's actually where my father was born, in Vorkuta in 1949. So from my father's perspective, he had, of course, internalized that life can be very difficult with governments like the ones you had in the USSR. And being the son of two individuals who had been considered enemies of the state, if something were to go worse, yes, there was the element of being Jewish, but there was also the element of having seen how bad life could be in the Soviet Union, and not wanting to, of course, repeat that or subject his child to that. And so that was the reason we left. Now, in terms of kind of the second thing I wanted to share, what was it like to arrive to Rochester? In our case, we arrived in 1979. Rabbi Vogel had mentioned that this was kind of a multi-part journey. In our case, we had spent about 6 months in Italy, in this little town called Ladispoli, where basically everybody who was a Russian Jew, or not everybody, but most people who were Russian Jews spent time in this area. And we were waiting to see who would take us, whether it was Canada or the US or Australia or New Zealand. And of course, Israel is another one that would take Jews as well, of course. In our case, though, those were the ones we had been looking at. And I know my parents were especially happy when they got their meeting with the US authorities, because the US authorities were so much more welcoming. And even though my father, who was for a long time a violinist of the Rochester Philharmonic, that was something that in some of the other country representatives he spoke with, they weren't quite as welcoming. They didn't feel that they needed another violinist in Australia and New Zealand, apparently. But in the United States, there was nothing but warm and welcome, and it left a very good impression and reaffirmed for them that they wanted to come here. Now, once we did arrive, we initially arrived to New York City. And it was the late 1970s in New York City, not the most peaceful, not the most easy time for especially my father without language to come into that environment and try to navigate his way. But he immediately started looking for work as a musician. Luckily, notes are of kind of an international language. He didn't need to necessarily become an expert English speaker. And the very first audition that he happened to find and schedule was one with the Rochester Philharmonic. And when my father came back from that audition, he told my mother, my goodness, not all of America is like New York City. There is this beautiful place I just went to. You have to see it. There's green space and people were so nice. and there was no beeping of horns. It's a paradise. Luckily for them and us, or for him and us, he got that job. And not only that, but the Rochester Philharmonic, because they had been contacted by one of the agencies that was helping Jews to assimilate, even gave him kind of a small early advance on his salary so that we could move to Rochester and start looking for a place to live. Once we did get here, we almost immediately found individuals that we ran into, whether it was because Jewish Family Service had some kind of programs or areas where you could meet people. And also, even in some cases, we actually were stopped by people in the street who kind of recognized that we didn't quite look like everybody else, and that perhaps we had just come from the Soviet Union. And a lot of those friends are actually still friends of my parents to this day. The Russian Jewish community back then was extremely close. And more than that, they were extremely supportive. So it was almost as soon as you would meet one or two people, you would immediately be invited to their homes. You'd be invited to the Russian parties. You would be given advice on where to move. I mean, yes, certainly everybody was initially kind of shuffled off for some period of time at Bobridge Drive, as was my family. But relatively shortly after that, especially for those with younger children, I mean, the grandparents would stay in Bobridge Drive oftentimes for years and decades. But those with small children, a lot of times they started immediately looking for, okay, what's the school district to which I'm going to move? A number of them, like mine, came to Brighton. And so we moved there in 1979, where I started the Brighton school system. And what I certainly remember is that almost everybody we encountered in Brighton and elsewhere was willing to be helpful. People would give us things to kind of outfit our kitchens. They would give us whatever we may need. And most importantly, really, it was advice and guidance. Because in many cases, some of these people were a few years ahead of us. But that was a lot when you just got to this country and are trying to navigate something new and something foreign. And it certainly made people like my parents and me have an extremely positive feeling about this community that's never gone away. And actually, the third part I wanted to talk about really relates to what happened in the 1980s, when that community was really kind of tested by this call to be helpful to get Soviet Jews out at that time. Now, you all may remember that at that point there were articles about some of the more prominent refuseniks that were that had some sort of ties to Rochester. Names like Edward Lazansky, Rima Brave, Alex and Ala Shostarovich and their girls, and then also my uncle and aunt, Alex and Ina and their daughter, all of which had been refuseniks, all of which were stuck for years in the former Soviet Union, unable to get out. And at that point, my parents, like some of the relatives of these individuals, they started being very active, really for the first time in their lives politically. They met with politicians. They went out and found allies in the community, people like Rabbi Judah Miller from Temple B'rith Kodesh, individuals like Sandy Gradinger, who also went to Russia and would visit individuals. And little by little, they helped each other to participate in this broader movement of trying to get attention for the people that we cared about, and more broadly for all Soviet Jews that wanted to leave and hadn't been able to at that point. And of course, one of my fondest memories, and it was so heartwarming to see the video earlier in this presentation, was that day in December 1987, when I, along with many others in Rochester, piled into these buses full of Jews and some allies, and went down to a pretty cold Washington, D.C. To protest, along with 250,000 others, the meeting that was taking place, trying to put pressure on Gorbachev, who was meeting with Reagan at that time in Washington, D.C., to open up the floodgates, to relax the restrictions on Jews being able to get out. I can certainly say that I've never felt that sort of level of community and togetherness, that sort of sense of joint purpose as I did kind of initially getting on that bus, and through those couple of days as we got there, spent time there and came back. It is something that I think changed all of us who participated. And of course, more importantly, it really did open up those floodgates, which enabled eventually over 1 million people to get out of the former Soviet Union. And I think when I, finally, when I think about what is it that Rochester has meant, because some people do kind of are amazed and delighted by the fact that many of the kids who came here from the former Soviet Union or their children, we've managed to do relatively well on average. And quite a few of us do very much want to spend time giving back to the community, and especially in ways that are similar to the ways that people kind of gave to us and were caring to us. I think in many ways, people who come here from that sort of setting, we all very much appreciate the risk and the bravery of our parents to get us here, to make that big, risky decision to come to the United States. And we also quite often, I'll certainly speak in my case, and we also quite often think about the grandparents and the great-grandparents and others who did live their lives either fully or partially under communism, who never had the chance to be free, to take risks, to try to be more than just people sort of passing the days along under the eyes of a watchful government. And so I think a lot of us, are probably pretty natural people who organize, who start businesses, because for us, our whole lives is essentially a risk that worked out, and it makes us, I think, in some ways, particularly optimistic about taking new risks. So I very much have enjoyed, by the way, thank you for organizing this. And now I gladly turn you over to Rabbi Laganov to tell his story.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. I feel so honored to be part of this group. What inspiring words we had heard in the past couple minutes. I would like to share my story as a newest member of the Rochester Jewish community. I'm very proud to be here, and my story is let's put it this way. Okay, so it's a little bit different than we had been hearing, but let me just start off like this. I'm just gonna be for a few minutes. I was born in Moscow. I was born in Moscow in 1983. In the completely, my parents were secular. They had very little connection to anything Jewish, as probably most Jewish people that were living in Soviet Union at that time. And I grew up knowing almost nothing Jewish about myself. Until my parents had been separated and divorced for many, many years. So I basically was growing up with my mother and my grandmother. And as I'm sure a lot of my mother and many mothers in Russia were very worried about their boys, Jewish boys, especially joining the Russian army, the mandatory draft, right? They've been hearing all kinds of stories, and this was their primary concern, and there should never come to a day where a Russian Jewish boy should be joining Russian army. So my mother was always on the lookout to try to figure out ways to get me out of it. I mean, I think she was on the lookout from the day I was born or something, even though the army doesn't start until you're 18. Anyway, so at the age of when I was about 11 or 12 years old, my mother saw a sign that there was a Jewish camp for Jewish boys that was opening up in the outskirts of Moscow, and they were going to have some maybe people from Israel there, from America would be working that camp, and immediately she enrolled me into that camp. Now, from that camp, this was during the summer. Before that, I was enrolled in a regular Russian Moscow public school. But after the camp, we were so inspired by the people that came and the people that inspired us from other countries, from Israel, from America. It was such a great and beautiful and warm experience that we decided to switch to a Jewish school that had just started a few years ago, a few years before that, in Moscow, which in and of itself was totally a miracle that there was a Jewish, even religious school that started in the center of Moscow, pretty much about 25-minute walk from the Red Square. It was started by the chief rabbi of Moscow, Rabbi Goldschmidt, and his wife, that had moved to Moscow in 1989 or 1991, something like that. So, and I was one of the first few students there. We'll still speak about that school today. The school still exists. Today, the school consists of about 400 kids there, and it had grown tremendously, and it's doing very, very well. It's really flourishing. But anyway, after studying there for a number of years, I had gone to from there. I was able to transfer to Europe, to Denmark. I went there myself as a student to something called Copenhagen Jewish Academy. There was a Copenhagen Jewish Academy in the city of Copenhagen, Denmark. That was put together. That was built especially for the boys from the former Soviet Union. So we were there, about 30 of us from all over Soviet Union. I went myself, without my parents, as just a student there, together with another 30 boys. And there was a dormitory there for us. After studying there for a number of years, I got an offer to come to the United States, not as an immigrant, but as a student, to another Jewish institution in New York. And I came also myself. Meanwhile, this whole time, my parents were still in Moscow. I would very rare go visit once in a while. We would talk on the phone, but that was it. And then I studied in the United States in different Jewish religious schools in New York and New Jersey for a number of years. I finished high school there, and then I stayed after high school to advance in my Jewish education. Eventually, when I was about 20 years old, I went to Israel to continue my Jewish education in Israel, in Jewish institutions in Israel. And then I came back to the United States. At that point, when I was about 23 years old, I found my wife. Now, my wife she was born in New York and in Brooklyn, but her parents are probably the product of everything that Meredith and Rabbi Vogel were talking about. They left Soviet Union actually left Moscow in 1975, also due to the pressure that the United States government was pressuring Russia to release Jews. So as a result of that pressure, they were able to get out, also through Italy, and they settled in Brooklyn. But my wife was already born in New York, and we met, and we got married, and we lived in New Jersey for about 5 years after we got married. Now at that point, I was still a student. Because of my wife, I got American citizenship. But I had, and we're living really good. It was really great years. And then now at that point, I have not been back in Russia for almost 10 years. My mother had come in every once in a while. She would come once a year, twice a year to visit us, but that was it. I had no plans at all to go back to Russia. I had really very little connection there because I left when I was pretty young, and that's what it was supposed to be. But then God obviously has other plans. At some point, there was someone from Moscow Jewish community was visiting Lakewood, New Jersey. That's the town where we lived, and he approached us and he said, "David, you know that there's a Jewish life in Moscow as well, not only in New Jersey." I said, no, I heard something, but not really. So he started telling me about a wonderful community in Moscow that is growing, and that there's schools, and there are kindergartens, and there's camps, and there are kosher restaurants and kosher supermarkets. And I couldn't believe what he was saying. And then he said, well, why don't you come with your wife for a weekend? We'll pay for your trip, no strings attached. and just come and enjoy yourself. It's on us. You don't, you know. So we left our 3 little kids in New York and went there for the weekend, and we're amazed what we saw. And at that point, we started thinking about maybe moving back to Moscow and working and strengthening the Jewish community where I came from. So one thing led to the next. At some point, we made the decision to move there, and we moved our young family there to Moscow. We first moved to Moscow for 2 years, and then we ended up staying in Moscow for 6 years. Now, we did a lot of different projects, a lot of different educational projects in Moscow. It was an amazing time. I will, at the end, in just a minute or two, I will show you some of the pictures that are from there. And it was an amazing experience, amazing time. And, you know, what I want to say, I want to just take you back a little bit to Soviet Union, right? Here we have been talking about getting out of there and starting a new life here, which was amazing. And we have to have tremendous amount of gratitude to everything that we have here in the United States. But as many Jews as that left the United States, that left Russia to come to either Israel or US, there are hundreds of thousands of Jews that remained behind. And those Jews, even though, you know, Iron Curtain fell, but they, for various reasons, they did not leave. And now they're living there, and they're having children, and they're having grandchildren. And we, those of us who have the opportunity to leave and to get a solid Jewish education and knowing Russian language, we felt that we have the responsibility to go back to Russia and try to inspire those Jews to come, either to, if they want to, they could leave. If they don't want to leave, they could stay, to strengthen the Jewish education in Russia itself. And we did this for 6 years. Now, and then it was time for us to leave, and we came here to Rochester, straight from Moscow to Rochester. And right now, the past 3 years, we've been living here with our family. And we've been so privileged to find this community who took care of us so well. And this is just briefly our story. Now, I just wanted to show you some of the pictures to take you back a little bit and just to give you a glimpse of what's going on now in Russia. And, you know, and just please give me a second. Okay. Okay, so these are some of the photos that we see. This is probably a lot of people recognize. This is as a the Central Moscow Shul. There are classes. There's young people wearing tefillin, putting on. These are young people studying the Aleph Beis. This is the young people attending the summer programs and camps. This is the people attending different classes and different programs. This is myself and my family in a kosher restaurant in Moscow, and so on. This is the Jewish school that has about today 400 students there. These are the summer camps, classes, the kindergarten. This is the Chief Rabbi of Moscow, myself making a presentation. The weddings that we were able to attend. The weddings as well. This is my wife as a teacher, a kids program, girls camp, the girls camp as well. There's the bat mitzvah presentation, and this is the community. And this is the summer camps, the weddings. So like this. So I wanted to show you that there's a tremendous amount of life, and just like there's in other words, when we look at these pictures, these photos could be from any community in the US or from any community in Israel. And now we see that there's a renaissance, a revival of the Jewish life in Russia. And this is truly amazing. And I feel this is the real victory over the whole, the Soviet Union and the communism and the oppression that people had been enduring for 70 years. It was so like Rabbi Vogel he mentioned he was in Moscow 40 years ago. I'm sure Moscow did not look 40 years ago like in those pictures, right? I'm sure it didn't. So, so this is the real, and we are here today as a result of people like Rabbi Vogel, actually, that went during that time, during the 80s and the 70s, and they inspired the generation of the Jews, of the young Jews, who not only left, but they stayed behind, and they became the leaders of the Jewish communities now, and they inspire now the people there. And actually, one more thing is, even though I live here in Rochester now, still did not, Moscow did not forget about me. So every summer I run a summer camp in Moscow for Jewish boys. Actually, I am going to Moscow in about a week to run a summer camp. We have about 100 Jewish boys enrolled, and it's going to be great, I hope. So let me just show you a video. That's a 2-minute video. It will also give you a glimpse of what goes on there, and then we'll finish. Okay. Just a second.
Fulfill, but I still wanna chill. Whoa, 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 whoa. Inashli, kudana. Start the party now. Cause in camp it's chaim, it's fun all the time. Kulanu besimcha, achdut v'shalom. Yagor de Ivrei, Mikru Gidruzei. It's chaim's my family, it's chaim's my home. It's chaim's my home. It's chaim's my אני אוהב חוויות וכיף לעשות דברים שמדליקים לי את הלב אבל עמוק בתוכי יש ניצוץ יהודי וואו 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 Cause everyone wants to have fun and nothing's funner than a summer in the sun But deep down we all wish we could get more Jewish Whoa 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 whoa
Куда нам идти, если
Time to start the party now. Cause in camp it's chaim, it's fun.
Okay. So this is an amazing things that is happening now in Moscow. What I want to say just the end for one more second is our rabbis tell us that we know that we read in the Torah there are many miracles that Jewish people had experienced when they left Egypt, when the sea split, and tremendous amount of miracles. Jewish people had seen the share of miracles, but our rabbis tell us that the biggest miracle that that they could possibly have is that the fact that the Jewish people are here today, despite of all the oppression and of all the challenges that we had experienced in the past thousands of years. This is the biggest miracle. It doesn't compare to the miracle of splitting the sea, to the miracle of the 10 plagues, and the miracle of the man coming down from heaven. The fact that we are here today, and the fact we could talk about the exodus that happened to the Russian Jews, and not only the Russian Jews, but the fact that we are here to talk about it, to come together and to get inspired. This is the biggest miracle of all. Again, I'm here. Rabbi Vogel is here. We're all here for to benefit the Rochester community. There's so many different opportunities, and we should never stop. That's this is what I think we have to be driven. We have to be driven. We should never stop. We should always look for opportunities to grow. We should always look for opportunities to become better. We should always look for opportunities to educate our children and to give them that sense of Jewish education, the Jewish responsibility for each other. And this is what we're here for. And I'm here to benefit the Russian Jewish community and to the Jewish community in general. And so we're always reachable. We have different classes, different things going on. And please, would love to know you more personally, but it's a great honor and a great pleasure to be here together with everyone. Thank you. Okay.
Wow. Thank you very much to our speakers for joining us today. Very inspiring. I enjoyed this tremendously. Thank you. If anybody has questions, please write it into the chat. I see there is a question.
Loaded.
So I assume this is for Rabbi Ladnov, maybe. Is Putin relatively tolerant of the Jews? Do the Jews influence in the government? Do the Jews have influence in the government? Do they serve in the parliament? Can maybe Rabbi Ladnov, do you know anything?
Yeah, I don't know very well what's going on in the Russian government, but what I saw from our experience of living there currently, the past 6 years, President Putin is one of the few world leaders today who is not anti-Semitic in any way. President Putin has been very, very positive towards the Jewish community. As we all know, in Russia, it's had never changed probably since for the couple hundred years already. Everything goes from the top to bottom, right? Meaning everything is from the top. If the leader, whatever the leader says, that filters down to everyone else, to the government, and also filters down to the general population. So the fact that the president had been very positive towards the Jewish community, had been very nice, had been always protective of it, and does a lot of different things. He goes on national TV together with the chief rabbi of Russia. President had been behind opening up a Chabad, one of the first, probably the only Russian Jewish museum of the Jewish heritage of Russia that is now being held, at the Chabad. The president was very much behind it. It's called the Museum of Holocaust and Tolerance. So from our experience there, it's been very good. And since the president is being very positive, so therefore everyone else is also, and therefore people on the street are as well. So even though maybe something that, a couple of years ago, 20 years ago, or 30 years ago would be unheard of, to walk around in the streets of Moscow wearing a kippah or be visibly Jewish. Today, we've been there for 6 years. Obviously, I cannot really hide the way I look, and certainly not my kids and the Jewish community. Not one incident of any kind of anti-Semitic even remark I had experienced on the streets, and for sure nothing physical there. And we lived in the center. We lived about 20-minute walk from the Red Square. So I think right now the Jewish community is really benefiting from the political situation now. Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you for your perspective, Rabbi Laganov. Thank you. I don't have any more questions. Few comments of thanks and gratitude. Well, it's been an interesting and inspiring event. I just wanted to, first of all, thank the Rochester Jewish community as a whole on behalf of my family, maybe on behalf of some other Russian immigrants, Soviet immigrants. We really felt welcomed and supported and throughout, and we really feel blessed to be here. Obviously want to thank our speakers, Meredith Dragon, Rabbi Vogel, Alex Zapisochny, and Rabbi Laganov. Really thank you for taking the time, and thank you everybody in the community for joining us today and really showing that you do care. You know, we are very grateful to be here, and this has been quite a beautiful community. In fact, I think I learned more about unity from our local community right here than anything I learned from the communist culture, which was based on also on forms of unity and so on. So thank you all. Please reach out to us if you feel like this was an interesting topic and we should explore this more. We're always welcoming and always open to ideas and sharing and more unity within the community. So thank you very much, and have a good night.
Good night, Gennady. Thank you so much for organizing it. Gennady, Gitana, we really appreciate your effort and pushing it and being on top of it. And it's really an amazing display of Kiddush Hashem. Thank you. And, wow. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a good night.
Okay.